Good evening, this is Mae Brussell. The title of this one-hour broadcast is World Watchers. It's program 769. It's September the 1st, 1986. On the bibliography sheet that accompanies the tapes that go to regular subscribers, last week I put down the information about the National Security Council and the death of Mr. Fortier, F-O-R-T-I-E-R, but I didn't mention it on the broadcast, and I just wanted to go over that very quickly, and I'll get back to it later. He died at the age of 39 just last week. He had a quick liver cancer, a 3-month cancer. I call that the Jack Ruby type, as against the lingering Martha Mitchell cancer, the long type. He was replaced by Alton G. Keel, Jr., and Keel's name came up. I'm sure you recognize it from the Rogers Commission. He was the executive director of the Rogers Commission examining the Challenger. Now, it's interesting, his background is assisted in the Air Force. He was in charge of research for Ronald Reagan since 1981, and a great deal of the Star Wars, of course. He previously served in the Senate Armed Services Committee under John Tower, which I had mentioned on the sheet, written about on the sheet. John Tower is the fellow that gave the quick extradition, the ability of Maureen Oswald to come to this country from Russia and pass that over very quickly. This staunch anti-communist was getting her to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to create the alleged motivations for what would become a coup in Dallas later on. I'll do more on Tower's role. I'll update that. I haven't done that for a long time on the air. But the point is that this man who worked for John Tower has now worked himself up to be deputy of the National Security Agency. And if Ronald Reagan ordered the Challenger to launch on January the 28th, if those 7 calls that have not been revealed, who made them and why, down to the launching at NASA, if they involved the orders that you've got to go, in addition to the fact that Ronald Reagan was going to start to talk about Krista McAuliffe in his speech that evening, his State of the Union speech, it would have to come from the highest above. It couldn't be even somebody like the White House Chief of Staff, Donald Reagan. It would have to be National Security Advisor. And people like Mr. Keel, of course, have left out of the commission investigation the role of the White House in possibly demanding the launch. And the result of this investigation for many, many months has been that they absolutely knew for a year that in cold weather it could not hold up, that probably the old ring would not hold. And the order to launch it only benefited the military and the national security highest level, because this way they could throw out all the civilians in the space program, such as they were planning with the teacher in space and the journalist in space and so forth. They got rid of a junky shuttle system that wasn't working. They kicked the civilians out, and now Mr. Keel has been promoted to be the deputy director of the National Security Agency under Mr. Poindexter, and that's a very important position. And he fills that role after covering up the Rogers Commission hearings, and they're not demanding the White House tapes regarding this very pertinent event that took place because they were bickering back and forth on whether to launch or not to launch. So that promotion is interesting in lieu of the fact that this 3-month cancer took place and Mr. Fortier was replaced. I have said for a long, long time, as have many people in books and investigative work, that cancer is a disease, a weapon. Just as AIDS has been created, cancer has been a weapon identified in the laboratories, starting with the Rockefeller Institute years ago, their medical institute, and is a convenient way to unload particular people if you want to replace them with a certain person in their position. Well, so much for that. I'll get back to Fortier and the arrangement in the National Security Council, the changes that have been taking place later on other broadcasts. Now, by way of introduction, the longest introduction I've ever made on a program, the end line that I'm going to deal with, that I've been working on all week, is the explosion in Cameroon and the consequences of that and what I believe happened. It was described as a neutron bomb, and there's no reason to think it wasn't. And all of the experts combined over the world are very hush-hush about it, and there are many secrets, as usual, when these kinds of weapons get tested. So by way of just getting back to the milieu or the background of the neutron bomb, I just want to bring up a few subjects that have to do with the Defense Department, with secrecy, with experimentations on people that have been going on and on. This isn't an exhaustive introduction. It's just a few samples. I just want to remind you of, in the book Spooks, Jim Hogan refers to the AVG, the American Volunteer Group, that were set up for American and political assassinations, and it involved the John Birch Society and General Edwin Walker, who brought people from Munich, Germany, for the assassination of John Kennedy. And it makes a full circle to people such as Robert K. Brown, a former Green Beret officer, closely linked to the Minutemen, to the private military mercenaries, to John Singlaub, now in Central America, where we're getting ready for an invasion of Nicaragua. The president has announced that it's just necessary to take the place over. The ABG group was set up following a few years after the announcement that the murder of John Birch in China, killed by the Chinese communists, and an obvious provocation I've talked about before on the air. John Birch was in the OSS, and when he was killed, it was described as the first shot of World War III. And then in the 1960s, the John Birch Society was setting up a AVG group, in addition to other assassination groups such as Operation Condor, and was setting up the Permandex organization to kill heads of states. Now, last week I referred to a reference that Walter Dornberger gave in New York. It was in the New York Times, June the 8th, 1958, where he came to this country from Nazi Germany. He was a war criminal from Peenemünde, and he stated clearly, this time America will fight with Germans against the Soviet Union. We didn't come to this country to lose the Third War. He came here for the purpose of winning World War III. So from the minute the war was over, the first shots of World War III were identified in Asia, in China. In Dallas, we had the coup when John Kennedy was murdered. These same people were involved with that. Mr. Dornberger was speaking about World War III in 1958. In 1946, and I cited this on the air when I was talking about advanced genetic sciences, there was an article in the New York Times, January 13th, of bacterial warfare and atomic bombs, and suggestions on learning how to protect yourselves in the future. We've had about 42 years to get ready to protect yourself from some of these things, and I wondered if any of this wasn't tested also in Cameroon. I hope to get to that immediately. And just this last week, Jeremy Denton from Alabama, the senator, had a motion to increase the war powers of President Reagan. And Denton is from Alabama, and it's Huntsville, Alabama, where Dornberger and von Braun and the Germans were brought, the Project Paperclip scientists, with the hope of World War III. And now the senator from Alabama is the man leading the suggestion that we give Ronald Reagan more war powers. And then, of course, there's been the suggestion that he remain on as president, third term, or however long it takes. Now, there are examples of White House lies that assist these war efforts, huge lies, and my entire 15 years, this is the 16th year on the air, has to do with these lies. But some of the most gross ones, if you can number them, gross, there was an article this past week in the San Jose Mercury titled, Embassy Bombers Known, U.S. Officials Hid Confessions. Now, this would take an entire broadcast. I'm just mentioning the title. It has to do with our knowing who killed the Marines in Lebanon in 1983, how they were never tried. Only one was killed. The others are out free. We knew all along who did this act, and this is about the CIA and our own United States government covering up Americans that were murdered in Lebanon. So 63 dead doesn't mean a thing to our United States intelligence, and they had no intention of pursuing him. The other factor that would take 52 weeks if I had a whole year is AIDS, and I want to keep doing more, and every week I touch on it a little. There's an article in the Examiner, September the 2nd, 1986, titled, Deadly New Murder Weapon, AIDS. And then on television last night, CBS News, there was Dr. Vernon Mark. You've heard me talk about him in regards to mind control. He was on the evening news at 6 o'clock, talking about AIDS and saying every person with AIDS should be isolated. And considering that AIDS could be a genocidal, selective disease to wipe out certain segments of our population is very important to remember Dr. Vernon Mark. I've used his name at least 150 times in the last 15 years. He's the fellow that did the brain surgery at Boston Hospital on Mr. Leonard Keeley, termed the Terminal Man. There was a book about him. And I'll do more about this broadcast where he gets in from psychosurgery and brain surgery into the AIDS controversy and the implications of Mr. Vernon Mark jumping into the muddy waters at this time. Again, all of this leading to World War III in manipulating our minds, and then his jumping over to the physical and to the AIDS. And another article in the LA Herald last week, trying to reach out to the world's tortured. UCLA psychiatrist wants $280,000 to start a facility. Of course, it's Dr. Jolyon West from UCLA, Jack Ruby's psychiatrist, a psychiatrist who wants to go into torture. He's been linked through the years to wanting to put secret electrode implants into people to continue torturous experimentations on the brain. And he worked with Ronald Reagan as governor and Edwin Meese as legal advisor when they were in Sacramento. And now he wants to take the world's tortured, and I'm sure they can rearrange through hypnosis who tortured them and what happened, and the guilty countries would get off or not be charged, and they would teach these victims of torture to simply forget. There's another long article I want to update on Russia accuses the U.S. Pentagon of inventing AIDS, and these are, as I say, the secrets, the Pentagon secrets of disease, of mind control, of assassinations, working in the laboratory, working on weapons, all the while to make human beings the victim of terrible things. And all of these various articles coordinate to certain monster head in Washington, D.C., and the legs of an octopus spreading out in the news. And I'm just citing some of these news articles. Another one from Wall Street Journal, an editorial, August 25th, Genetic Warfare, and it talks about biological and chemical weapons being put aside for a few years, which wasn't true. Actually, they were kept. And I do keep saying I want to update that. When Nixon said he would destroy them, they weren't destroyed at all. But now they're referring to the research and work of Mr. Feith, who had a long article in the Washington Post, saying we can now take the bacteriological weapons and the toxins and combine them like with designer drugs and get into genetic engineering, and then we really do have a good warfare weapon. So genetic engineering as a means of control, and again, that's what I was worried about with advanced genetic sciences, with their links to DuPont and Roman Haas and IG Farben, that this was the beginning of bacteriological warfare, genetic warfare in the farm fields and in the food produce around our country, testing it out. And this editorial, as I say, is a follow-up on a long article in the Washington Post on weapons, genetic weapons, and rethinking our attitude about them because they're very useful. And the article says because of the advance we've made in genetics, we may rethink our warfare weapons and go into genetics combined. Biological weapons and genetics being merged would be very advantageous to us. This comes at a time when the Senate passed a bill on chemical warfare, rather, not the biological, but increasing the chemical weapons. And George Bush made sure to be there to break the tie. The House, so far, Representatives, has held it down and said no. But George Bush's intentions were, yes, I want the chemical weapons by all means, and that's our vice president sitting there waiting to become president someday. Now, there are other puzzles and disgusting incidences that are no mysteries that link to our Pentagon. There was an article, just San Francisco Chronicle yesterday, Puzzle of the Monster Earth Cookie, and this has to do with large hunks of earth, 7 by 10 feet, that weigh more than 1.5 tons, that are removed from circles, and it's up in Washington, the state of Washington, and there are large letters that describe these mysteries. It says there are a growing number of theories, from a clandestine Defense Department operations to tiny black holettes colliding with the planet. But they can't explain this enormous change of the Earth in this particular area, and again, they are questioning clandestine Defense Department operations. Now, the Defense Department and the Atomic Energy, of course, keep many secrets. We can't even spend a lifetime going into all their major secrets, I don't suppose. But another article in the San Francisco Chronicle and on the Wire Service this week, how the crewmen of the Air Force bomber accidentally dropped a hydrogen bomb on New Mexico 29 years ago. And this was kept secret. This was May 22nd, 1957. It didn't go off. There was no nuclear blast, but non-nuclear explosives were in the bomb that detonated and hit the ground. And, of course, it hit an area where if anybody would recognize what it was well concealed and lied about. It was confirmed in 1981 that this happened, but no details were released. And the fact is that these bombs can go off in general populations, and when they're testing them and carrying them, and they drop, we're not told about it for many years later. This is a long time, from 1957 to 1964. There was a reunion in Berkeley just a week or two ago of victims of Operation Crossroads, the Bikini Island Lagoon. And the area has been described in some new books that have come out. One book is called No Place to Hide, and it's about atomic veterans fighting for their rights. And it tells that in July of 1946, 42,000 human guinea pigs were exposed to atomic bombs. From 1942 to 1967, 250,000 GIs were subject to 235 atomic tests. And in this one article, No Place to Hide, it tells that the testing stopped in 1962, but it doesn't give credit to John Kennedy, who literally risked his life in having the nuclear test ban treaty. In fact, I have one short article saying that the reason John Kennedy was murdered was that he bucked up against the Pentagon and forbid them from testing this or testing our people anymore with this kind of horrible accident, which has caused many, many cancers since. And the amount of cancers is what is concealed. And even though the American people could read about tests, and I'm sure they read them, just as they read about Cameroon now, but they're not making connections of what could portend operations of this kind for World War III. Now that the tests have been made, they're making tests of other kinds of weapons and putting all of this under the rug. Now, there was a large article in these Times that a listener sent to me September the 2nd, 1986 by Peter Dale Scott. And this is called The Department of Energy Plugs the Leak on Radiation Leaks. And this is a long article. Every word is important, and I'll do the details for you possibly next week or the week after. And this tells about this huge leak that was done in Nevada, in Las Vegas, Nevada, that took place April 28th to 30th, and they were forced to release atomic gases into the air. And the Chernobyl disaster occurred April 26th, so that some of the radiation and subsequent fallout could be from what is called Mighty Oak in Vegas and not Chernobyl. And then the article goes on to refer to the West German radiation from a separate reactor disaster, May the 4th, and outside of my covering it on World Watchers and seeing it in just one or two papers, it has been concealed, and the effects of millions of murders by chemical, and I call them murders by chemical cancer being caused. The Energy Department is blaming the Soviet Union for all of these leaks. This author, Peter Dale Scott, is one of the most renowned researchers who's written about the concealing of a $70 million atomic accident right here in our own backyard in Las Vegas. And the person who supplied the information for him is Preston Truman, who is one of my favorite researchers, a longtime friend, and I'm always indebted to him. He's the one who got me the William Colby report, the CIA report on Mullen Associates, and provided me other documents and research. And I think this is the first time Preston's name has been published, so a lot of people who help me in the research and give me a lot of material and send it to me, I don't put their name on unless they're publicly recognized, because many of them want to stay unidentified to continue their work without being hassled. And the reason Preston is so knowledgeable about this radiation leak in Nevada is he's been in the forefront of trying to expose the chemical radiations from Dugway, Utah, years ago that are just again surfacing. And again, more links to Jonestown, where the sheep died, and Dr. Lawrence Layton was the military man in charge of the testing grounds, where they said it wasn't the radiation, the sheep just laid down and died and their skin fell off. And now the people and the families all around them that had the sheep are dying. And those were big secrets that weren't secrets that we could have acted on again. And that's why I say the Cameroon blast is so important, because we let these opportunities pass and they keep adding up. and you can go on and on about secrets that really aren't secrets. Now, there's a book called Justice Downward, America's Atomic Testing Program in the 1950s. It's written by Howard Ball. It's about the testing from 1951 to 1963, how the United States government detonated atomic bombs in the Nevada desert, and how it went down into the homes of 100,000 people, the Mormons in Utah, and how it affected their lives. That is a new book. Another book that came out in 1984 that is excellent, short book called The Day We Bombed Utah by John G. Fuller. It's published by Signet Press. It came out in 1984. And this book tells about the group around John Wayne that made the movie The Conqueror in Utah. And all four of the superstars died. John Wayne, Susan Hayward, Dick Powell, and Agnes Moorehead all died of cancer. And nearly 100 members of the cast and crew contracted cancer. Half of them have died from making this movie. And this book is about the sheep and the droppings and how the atmosphere changed and how bombs were shot out. And it also describes that these atomic bombs were detonated from tall metal towers, and others were dropped from planes. And I bring this up because I believe that a plane could drop that neutron bomb into the lake that caused the reaction that killed over 1,200 people in Cameroon. And I'll go back into the stirring of the lake. And in Utah, where right in our own country, in Nevada and Utah, they were dropping from plane those things that have caused thousands of deaths so far, and maybe there'll be many, many more. I will go into The Day We Bombed Utah again. Each one of these subjects could be a long broadcast, but I want to skip them over, just give you titles of books and articles to show you the milieu that I'm just coming across in the last few weeks across my desk as I'm cutting out articles about Cameroon. One chapter from that book, Justice Downward, is called They Lied to Us, and there's a reprint of that chapter. It was in the San Francisco Chronicle magazine section, August 31st, 1986, just yesterday, and it begins after a 20-year battle. Neighbors of the A-bomb are still fighting the government, and the point is they're calling these things they lied to us. That's why I said and began the program by saying that there's such important secrets such as the embassy bombing in Lebanon, the Korean airline, the motives, and what really happened, the Grenada invasion, the Grenada Medical Hospital, the Howard Hughes story and his links to the Defense Department and Mullen Associates, and the people testing in Nevada that caused these cancers and deaths and are still leaking. It isn't a thing of the past. They were leaking their radiation this June, and it's probably still going. And the Jonestown secrets that have been locked up by the CIA and Defense Department, and the assassinations, those are secrets and lies, outright lies of what happened. And as I say, one chapter here that is quoted in just a section of this book, the Justice Downward, says they lied to us. Now, all of these people have something to do with chemical, atomic, bacteriological warfare, and they have lied to us, and they're causing so many deaths. The San Jose Mercury had an article this past weekend, August 30th, 1986. The trial of Larry Layton is about to begin. This is his third trial. He's had two other trials. He's not charged with the murder to kill Leo Ryan. Heavens forbid that somebody would kill Leo Ryan, who was stopping the CIA covert actions in Angola and was embarrassing our CIA and prohibiting that. He's been charged with accidents and shootouts involving the shooting of Leo Ryan, but not the actual shooting of Leo Ryan. That test will begin soon. Now, in this article in San Jose Mercury, and again, I'll get back to this along with these others, they said Larry Layton cited the extensive publicity about the case and the witnesses' loss of memory. Through a passage of time, and in some cases, psychiatric therapy helped them forget the Jonestown events. Now, that's what the Psychological Institute of Jolly West will do at UCLA with torture. They'll forget who tortured them in the process of forgetting what hurt. And that's what I talked about William Rehnquist being under psychiatric drugs from 1972 until 1981 so that he would forget his role in the police state operations under Richard Nixon and through the time period of Watergate. And this article says that there have been psychiatrists who have been using the therapy so they forget the whole thing. And the whole purpose of forgetting it is not to be able to finger the people who did it. Now, the operations going on in Africa, just briefly, and I'm sure many of you, most of you take World Watchers, read your papers, maybe not as many as I have. I'm just going to run down for you a few things that are happening in Africa right now to set the milieu for the Cameroon explosion that killed so many people, which was described as a neutron bomb. And for all purposes, from reading as much as I can just this 1 week, it certainly does appear like a test of the neutron bomb. In the first place, millions of people are dying from AIDS. I had on my broadcast last week the United States government working secretly with Belgian doctors, top secret. Nobody can talk about what's going on in Zaire. There's AIDS in Zaire, Uganda, and the central part of Belgium. AIDS is very, very dangerous in Africa, and heterosexuals are dying of AIDS, maybe as many as 5 to 10 million right now. The second article I just want to cite is World Vision given $400,000 to relief in Chad. LA Times had a story January the 11th this year describing World Vision as a Christian front, and I've talked about them as being recipients of CIA money in Cambodia, in Central America, and the family of John Hinckley are very close and were affiliated, probably still are, with World Vision. They also are very close to former CIA Director George Bush, and the reason for World Vision being down there in Chad is because of the drought, and Chad is a country that their name comes up right now because of the interest of Gaddafi and his friendship with Chad, and we're trying to move the Libyans out of Chad. So World Vision is in Chad. Another article, scientists respond to charge he killed Dr. Fauci in Rwanda. San Jose Mercury this past week. He said United States officials wanted her out, that Rwanda is a key listening post for the United States. They want information for nearby African countries, and that's why they had her killed. Another article, locust swarm threaten Africa. San Francisco Chronicle, August the 4th. The countries mainly hardest hit are Chad, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Mali. Now, Chad, Sudan, and Ethiopia are reasonably non-aligned. They are a pain in the neck to the Western military and our Pentagon, and those seem to be the countries that are getting the locusts. And Chad borders on Cameroon, the location of the possible neutron bomb testing, and we're talking about bombing the Libyan section of Sudan, so those countries are in the news in terms of Gaddafi and also close to Cameroon. Another article, Contra aid blamed for relief freeze. This is an article, San Francisco Chronicle, July the 11th. Money raised to feed people in Ethiopia is being sent to Nicaragua to the Contras. Ethiopia again targeted with locusts, insects, and grasshoppers. Ethiopian money going to the Contras. It was raised for Ethiopia. Another article, starvation, musicians relief fills the gap, and it tells about the Band Aid, the World Aid music concert, how much they helped Africa, and because of their being so good, there are only 50 million people starving there today. San Jose Mercury, July the 7th. Another article, behind the Israeli-Morocco meeting, I just talked about briefly last week, from People's World, this is August 23rd, the meeting of Prime Minister Shimon Peres meets with Morocco's King Hassan. And then 5 days later, an article from the Monterey Herald, King Hassan abrogates 1984 treaty with Libya. Israel flies to Morocco, Peres goes to Morocco, and they have their meeting. 5 days later, King Hassan breaks his treaty with Libya. Then, following that, a few days later, Peres' visit to Cameroon underscores Israeli gains. He's first gone over to Morocco, and they're getting ready for the heated-up war against Libya. Now, Shimon Peres, goes to Cameroon simultaneously with the time that this strange, described as neutron bomb, goes off in a lake and kills about 1,300 or more people. He goes to Cameroon, and that was August 26th. He started his visit August 25th. Then the headline, Volcanic Lake Fume Kills 2,000 in Cameroon, San Francisco Examiner and National Wire Services. And on the same page of that paper, it says Peres in Cameroon at the time this bomb, described as what looked like a neutron bomb, goes off in a lake. He's being entertained with a 10-mile parade from the airport to the president's palace. I'm going to take a 1-minute break now and then go into the subject of Cameroon and just have a few more items to discuss with you about what is happening in Africa at this time. And of course, the United States ambassador from the UN, Mr. Vernon Walter, our roving killer, who sort of replaced the visible Henry Kissinger, always behind the scenes. And Walters, a Knight of Malta from the Vatican, is trying to coax our allies to put pressure upon Mr. Gaddafi in Libya and really to escalate the war in the Mediterranean, have a staging place later for our war against the Soviet Union. That was the goal of Mr. Dornberger, Walter Dornberger, when he came to this country. We're getting closer to it. His advisors and helpers were all Knights of Malta. The president of Cameroon is a Catholic, and the Pope was there in 1985, just a year ago. We'll do a little bit more on that and continue with specifically Cameroon for the next 30 minutes. This is Mae Brussell, and this is the second half of my one-hour broadcast, World Watchers. Before I get into the second half, I want to remind you, if you send a self-addressed stamped envelope, I will send you a bibliography sheet with references to the material I use on the broadcast. The first half hour, I've just rushed off and just given you the titles of articles and books. Each one of those subjects would take an hour by itself, but as way of background, I had to hurry through that material just to give an overview of what's in the news and currently being printed and where you can get access to more details on these stories. And if you write to me, P.O. Box 22511, Carmel, California, 93922. State which broadcast you heard, and remember, one stamp will carry you for 4 sheets, bibliography sheets for 4 broadcasts, past broadcasts, and once a month you can send an envelope if you want. Then punch holes in them and collect them and put them in a 3-hole notebook, and at the end of the year you have 52 pages, or actually it's 104 pages there, of resource material where you can look up information that's pertinent actually to all of our survivals. I think it's necessary to keep a record of this material because I can't even remember. I remember what I put on, but I can't remember the sequence, and I have to look up material, and the sheets are very helpful. Okay, now just to complete a couple things. In Africa, there was an article, several articles on the stealth bomber this past week. Washington Post had a long one titled, 50 Stealth Fighters in Operation, Secret Squadrons Fly at Night. Now, as I'm going to share with you as much as we have time, the explosion that took place over Cameroon took place at night, and the first explosion in 1984, where 37 people were killed, also happened at night. And the stealth bombers, I don't know how far they can reach, what their speed is in terms of mileage or refilling for gasoline, but I know last week the head of NATO, Mr. General Rogers, told Muammar Gaddafi, we don't need to have airplanes leave from England in order to bomb you. We can take our B-52s from New York, go to Libya, and then come back. We also have access to the 6th Fleet that harbors itself in Haifa. Israel is our strongest and 101% ally, and they can do no wrong even when they do wrong. So we could have airplanes that leave, such as the stealth that can't be detected, leave at night, and these stealth planes are already operational. So why not use them and drop a little bomb in a lake and test what happens to the people of the agriculture around? So it's a good idea to follow more on the stealth as they are becoming more visible. Also, another article, it was printed in Spotlight, August the 4th, 1986, controversial Israeli fighter built with U.S. technology. This is on one of their new fancy airplanes, and the article says it will be used to dominate its neighbors for intense wars in close quarters, and it's about, again, a wonderful invention of the Americans and the Israeli for increasing the warfare capability to keep people in control around the world, particularly in the Middle East, which is the Armageddon headquarters for invading the Soviet Union and having this war against communism. The Lavi project is the airplane that I'm referring to. Now, to get to the articles, I'm going to cite references in chronological order since the story of the volcanic flames, allegedly flames, that killed people, gas flames out of the lake. It first surfaced in our newspapers August 25th, even though the original accident and the deaths took place August 22nd, late at night, and early on the 23rd, Thursday night, late, and Friday morning. The first article that I had on the subject is called Volcanic Lake Fumes Kill 2,000 in Africa. And as I said, underneath the article it says, Israelis Perez is in Cameroon to restore relations. Now, his visit wasn't called off because of a national tragedy or these deaths or this terrible gas that was fuming. He was visiting there at the same time, and Mr. Shimon Perez not only was visiting, but he took 6 doctors and a full medical team, which seems very coincidental. So while he's being entertained in one part of the country, another part is going through this terrible tragedy. Now, the first account came out from the main city of Cameroon, Yaoundé, Yaounde, and it says a release of toxic sulfur gas followed an explosion in a volcanic lake in a remote part of western Cameroon and killed at least 2,000 people. 17-member Israeli Army medical team arrived today as part of the international relief efforts that will involve the United States, Britain, and France. Now, Israel hadn't had relationships with this country in about many years. I think it was 12 or 13, maybe 20 years. And all of a sudden, Mr. Shimon Peres, the Prime Minister of Israel, is making a rapprochement with Cameroon, and he just happens to be traveling with 6 doctors and a 17-member Israeli team. And their first interview on the matter, Mr. Perez and the doctor said, as far as we know, volcanic activity is still going on, and then it turned out that the volcanoes are dormant, and it had nothing to do with volcanoes, the poison gas. A Dr. Michael Weiner, an Israeli doctor, was on the plane with Mr. Prime Minister Perez, and he said there has been no official government report of volcanic activity following the announcement that there was volcanic activity. The government could find none, but Dr. Weiner's first interview assumed there was and gave an interview about volcanic activity, which may be just as good as a Lee Harvey Oswald did it cover of the event. The Cameroon information minister told reporters that there was an explosion that lies in the volcanic crater that apparently triggered the release of gas. Now, what you're going to hear in these combined articles is probably, apparently, could have. They had a lot of chances to examine this situation in 1984 when 37 people died at a lake nearby, and all the experts of the world could have been there. But I'm wondering if that was a mini-test that never was really put on the surface, just as Jonestown was never put on the surface, so that the causes of that explosion and the gas killing 37 people is a secret and as unknown as the one that happened now, but it was 2 years later, so you'd think they'd want to know what happened. The Cameroon Minister of Information expert, as I say, said apparently the explosion apparently triggered the release of gas. And then in a town close by, with their borders near Nigeria, there were other articles, and not too many, but several that I have from different newspapers, describing the relationship of Cameroon to Nigeria. As I say, their borders are close to each other. Now, the last time I saw a relationship with the Mossad and Algeria was when a particular person from Nigeria, from Nigeria was in London. This was about 2 years ago. And he was living in London, and he was chloroformed and kidnapped and put in a box, and the people at Heathrow Airport got suspicious of this particular plane and opened it up, and inside with the man who was chloroformed was a very prominent doctor from Israel who had just been given a particular hospital, and he was an agent of the Mossad, and his wife and children, or allegedly, didn't know, and he told them he was going on a medical convention trip, and he actually was in London chloroforming a man to have him sent to Nigeria, bordering on Cameroon. And so just to show the closey relationship that could develop between Cameroon and Nigeria, Israel could be a factor, a common denominator, helping one country out. They may be glad to help Cameroon out, and they're opening their relationship at this time, which includes, the newspaper article said, was security being the Mossad, and 2 countries back to back. Israel could help with security, just as the Israeli Mossad guarded the security of Mr. Strassner in Paraguay, in charge of airports and security for a known Nazi Nazi sympathizer, but an outright Nazi who was harboring Joseph Mengele at the time, and everybody knew it. So the Mossad is offering security to Cameroon, and they also are helping in Nigeria to bring somebody back, and using a well-known doctor, even getting him into an airplane and putting some guy into a box. The first communique of the incident called it a geological catastrophe, but as you read on, it could be man-made and not so much geological. The first article said the delay of relief teams was caused by first their not knowing it took place, and then they couldn't get in to this Cameroon, to the town where the lake was, to help get the people. Well, there was no care. Everybody was dead from the explosion from 3 towns, and then a nearby town. Some were injured, and others died on the periphery around. There were survivors, but 3 villages were completely wiped out. And the first reports came from the Ivory Coast that said they hadn't been able to reach the sites right away. Now, after the Jonestown operation and Representative Leo Ryan was murdered, he was a senator, Leo Ryan, then the delay of our planes in coming to Jonestown was caused. They said they couldn't land at the airport. They landed 3 days later, so they could have landed early, but by delaying it, the bodies rotted and were not identifiable, which was, I'm sure, the purpose of the delay, to let them rot in the sun. And this was sort of a memory of Jonestown and Dr. Lawrence Layton Sheep in Dugway, Utah, that they waited till the flesh had peeled off these people, as in Jonestown, and were put in mass graves. And again, only a couple of autopsies were done, like Jonestown, 6 out of 912, in this case 6 out of 2,000 or more. San Francisco Examiner had an article, August 25th, volcanic lake fumes kill. The United States and Britain will apply logistical support for the evacuation of villages. France offered unspecified help. Cameroon is an oil-producing nation the size of California. It has natural gas reserves and agriculture, and they have industry and some minerals, but it's a fairly well-off country that has been applying its profits in oil to build up its large cities and university, and they have not had troubles like some of their neighbors. This one article says Cameroon bordered by Nigeria on one side, by Chad on the northeast, and Central African Republic to the east, Congo, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea to the south, and the Atlantic Ocean to the west. So it is a very strategic country, and it is run by a military dictatorship, and the dictatorship was put in by France and with the approval of the Western nations. And as I say, while they're bordering on a very controversial country like Chad at this time, the United States government is ready to go in and take over Chad. World Vision is working there, and so it's in a strategic location, obviously. And the empires that moved out of Africa didn't mean that they didn't give up their interest in controlling these people. If they couldn't control them, they would kill them. Now, August 16th in 1984, there was another situation in a lake where it killed 37 people. August seems to be a good time to test these things. The one happened in August of 1984, and August 83 and September 1st was the Korean airline incident when Ronald Reagan was up at his Eagle's Nest in Santa Barbara. In August of 84 was the Lebanon embassy bombing, and right after that was the invasion of Grenada. And now this August, the fumes of Cameroon, and also in August of 86, the president is getting ready to bomb Libya again and coaxing our allies. There seems to be a lot of extra time in the summer to heat things up. The LA Herald had a story, geological catastrophe, and it says Shimon Peres was headed for the West African nation, and the only official report to mention casualties at first said 40 people were killed by gas seepage. Now, there was a lot of discrepancy, and there still is today, and the conclusion of the scientists and the various researchers that have flown over there, one of the most scary conclusions, of course, is the one we may never know. They started out with hydrogen sulfide as the cause of the deaths because it is colorless. It smells like rotten eggs, and it forms a putrefaction and decomposition in animal matter found in volcanic gases. And then on the other hand, as you read the other articles, hydrogen sulfide is ruled out because small amounts you could smell, but enough that would make it fatal to die. Your nose is numbed from it, so you wouldn't smell it. But the very first stories begin with hydrogen sulfide as the guilty party. Then another large article in the San Francisco Examiner, and many of you might have seen it on your wire services, a diagram of the gases, how deadly gas might have escaped. Now again, there's the probablys and the might do it, and I first learned those from reading the Warren Report, the explanations of Dealey Plaza. It might have happened, it probably happened this way, it could have happened. And then the article, it has a big subtitle, the area looks as if it had been hit by a neutron bomb. Now that wasn't my original idea, this came from Reverend Fred Horn, a Catholic priest who gave the first account of the area. He said it was as if a neutron bomb had exploded. It destroyed nothing but killing all life. The animals and the people were dead in 3 villages, just about every one. Just a couple happened to survive it, but everything else was gone and wiped out, and he seemed to be knowledgeable about neutron bombs, and he said this is what it appeared to do. In the first village we came across, we saw men, women lying dead on the ground in front of their huts, stretched out on their beds, sometimes in the street. Survivors, some of them in the nearby villages on the periphery, complained of painful burning in their chest, followed by the sickening odor. And yet in the village of Nios, Nios, they saw absolutely no survivors of any kind. They heard a strong detonation, a loud noise, and Dr. Fred Horn said he and other priests said survivors reported hearing the explosion on Thursday night, and the dead were discovered on Friday, August 22nd. A very loud explosion at night, and then all these people were just found dead, laid out, and the account of them, some scrambled, some died in their sleep, some in front of the house. The circumstances vary, except there were no survivors. Reverend Horn, of the Catholic Church, flew over the lake in a Cameroon Army helicopter to see what was going on, and part of the vegetation on the lake shores was burned. Some banana trees snapped in two, but for the most part, it was not affecting anything, vegetation or hills, according to the stories of any kind. It was just the people and animals that died. Reverend John Ambe, another Roman Catholic priest working in the area, said that victims, survivors from the nearby towns, told of gas victims being buried in mass graves. They were dumping them into graves, that people just fell down and died. There was no sign or warning. And those survivors from the nearby towns had burns on their faces, and it wasn't clear what caused the burns. Besides the probablys or the could-haves, they don't know what caused their burns, and the kinds of gases that they describe might not necessarily cause the burns, but some people in hospital have burns on their body. Some other articles went on that the gas affected a 6-mile area. The president ordered the dead buried immediately, and army troops were to prevent people from entering the disaster area. They ordered nobody can come into this area. They isolated the region. They tried to stop people from going back in the area, and they congratulated France and Israel, West Germany, and the United States for coming to their aid. Now, France and the United States, as I say, are working secretly in Zaire and probably other places out of the Pasteur Institute on experiments of AIDS in Africa, and Israel's been experimenting and working with the United States in many of these mysterious weapons, and had their prime minister there at the time. And Germany, France, Israel, and the United States are the biggies in coming in and sweeping up after this operation. The victims, now this is the discrepancy of the different gases, which I think is interesting because, as I say, they've had 2 years to study the last explosions. The victims apparently had been overcome by hydrogen sulfide. That was the first account from the Cameroon officials. Then France said, the French specialists said, they believed it was a concentration of carbonic gas. The United States came in with a third opinion. It might be a concentration of 3, hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and possibly carbon monoxide. And they give the reasons why 3, and describe carbon monoxide as odorless but lethal. Now, these people died of asphyxiation, and it reminds me of Jonestown, where they took the cyanide in their drinks, Adolf Hitler recipe, and emergency teams said they had symptoms of asphyxia where there's strangling. It seemed like there was strangulation. I don't know enough about it yet to know about the burns accompanying strangulation or about neutron bombs, but the circumstances are questionable enough to bring it up and share this with you and do more research on it, just as when the Challenger story broke, or Jonestown, or 100 other items such as this. I spent 2 or 3 weeks doing enough extensive research to satisfy my first impression of what was happening. And of course, the Catholic priest was nice enough to say off the start that he thought it was a neutron bomb. The gas released, according to the scientists later, was not prompted by the eruption. And then they announced, as I say, that the volcano didn't erupt, although the first accounts were obvious it erupted, and this is what they suffered from. Then the geologist said something must have forced the lake to turn over and cause these gases to come out, but they don't know what it is. Well, could the something in the dark of night, they described the dark of night and the hearing of the explosion, could the something be a neutron bomb, being is the way the people responded? And given the secrets of Jonestown, when Jimmy Carter was president, and with him he had, his right-hand man was Dr. Peter Byrne, who worked with Agent Orange and chemical biological warfare in Vietnam. And Dr. Byrne's father then headed that secret, mysterious Grenada medical school. And we had United States bombs killing people in the mental hospital before troops really had major operation of any political nature. They got sure to wipe out the patients in this hospital, and the news media weren't on the island for several days. And again, those were mass graves, thrown into mass graves and huddled off. Nobody could examine them. Nobody could do autopsies. Then the graves were dug up and the bodies were thrown in the ocean. And what you have are large amounts of bodies in Jonestown, Grenada, and Cameroon under mysterious circumstances where only the military handle them and nobody can see them. When they talked about one of the possible poisons, this carbon monoxide being the possible cause of death of these people, it reminded me of my book, The Crime and Punishment of I.G. Farben, published by Joseph Borken in 1978. Macmillan published it. And in that book, there's a photograph of Otto Ambros, the scientist that created the chemicals, which was the carbon monoxide, the Zyklon B for extermination of I.G. Farben during World War II. And also in that book is a picture of Otto Ambros and Herman Abst. Well, today, Herman Abst, still alive, is a representative of the Vatican Bank working with John Paul II, who worked for I.G. Farben at Auschwitz, where this same carbon monoxide was used for mass murder. Herman Abst, he's active in banking and I.G. Farben today, and Otto Ambros, who worked on the poison gas, the expert of poison gas, if you want to see his picture in the book, The Crime and Punishment of I.G. Farben, was brought to this country by J. Peter Grace under Operation Paperclip, which was the one that General Dornberger was brought in, and Werner von Braun, the Dornberger I began the program with and mentioned last week, who's anxious for World War III. All of these men working with this carbon monoxide, this genocidal weapon for killing useless eaters, as they call them, mass population. And I'm sure that this establishment thinks of the blacks in Africa like they do the Jews in Germany or elsewhere. Otto Ambros, brought to this country by J. Peter Grace, who is benefited with Grace having almost a cabinet position for Ronald Reagan. Ambros floating around in this country, and Herman Abst with the Vatican, the Pope working for Herman Abst during the war at I.G. Farben. And now we have a situation in Africa, in this pathetic Cameroon, of some native population who are not Catholic, surrounded by a Catholic community. Herman Abst, a Knight of Malta. And the book I.G. Farben tells about the final solution of getting rid of Jews, and the extermination started in 1939, in the mobile vans using carbon monoxide from their exhaust, and the extermination centers that built up then to the mass extermination centers at Auschwitz and other camps, and the use of Zyklon B after the carbon monoxide, which seemed too slow. Now, one of the speculations is the carbon monoxide poisoning of these particular people, and as I say, it looks for all purposes as if they were easy targets for experimenting on a neutron bomb and similar kinds of poisons gases could be used in Jonestown to get those people to lie down like nice little animals in a row with blankets on top of them. And with the links of Mrs. Layton, she was part of the I.G. Farben family in Germany, put money into Jonestown. Her husband was active in Dugway, Utah, both with the killing of the sheep and the cancers that followed, but in keeping the secrets locked up. So I.G. Farben's gases of carbon monoxide and the articles about carbon monoxide down at this particular village, these three villages, are so pathetic because it seems as if not only were they doing these things in the past, and as I began the broadcast showing you from 1946-45, the intent to have World War III with John Birch, and bringing the paperclip scientists here and using biological weapons that were revealed in 1946, and the use of I.G. Farben even today, and their scientists, and the Polish Pope who worked with them during the war. Why wouldn't they extend their experiments to Cameroon? And it seems they did. Now, another article goes on about the background of Cameroon. They, as I said before, they neighbor Nigeria. They had colonial rule under the British once, and now the French are pretty much in control of keeping this current president in power. They are the persons behind the president of Cameroon. But there have been many articles just pouring out about the French intelligence bombing the Greenpeace ship in New Zealand because, or Australia, because they were going to test neutron bombs again down in that area. Again, the neutron bomb testing. So the French had to have the necessity of blowing up the Greenpeace ship. And what did they not want us to know, and how long do you test neutron bombs before you test them on people? How long do you have to test them above Earth and then give them off to people? An article from the San Francisco Examiner this week, how volcano spews deadly gases, and it tells about August 1986, the volcanic rock, where this huge asphyxiation took place and over 1,200 died. They, again, in each of these articles can't find the reason for the poisons. And this article says there's climate differences that might have contributed, and they blame it on the Cameroon climate and the warm summers. And I don't think climate has any more to do with it than the AIDS in Africa has to do with a lot of reasons that they're giving. And the article goes on August the 6th. It was also at night, like before, and it mentions that poison gases came out and killed 37 people in 1984. In 1986, in August, again, always at night. This is what the San Francisco Examiner says. And it described at 11:30 p.m. an explosion that seemed less than a mile away and probably included, then it lists the chemicals, and some people were covered with burns. And then in come the experts from the United States Geological Survey, and the first one quoted is William Evans from Menlo Park. Now, I just wonder if William Evans from Menlo Park, and maybe he'll hear this broadcast on KFJC, is he aligned with Stanford Institute in Palo Alto in any way? That's just a stone's throw. And Stanford Institute was behind the attorney Tim Stone that helped Jim Jones set up Jonestown and the charter for it. And they had Dr. Goodhill supplying drugs and medicines for Jonestown. And Menlo Park is a nest of Stanford Research Institute. And it'd be interesting to know if one of the first scientists down there at Cameroon from Menlo Park was a part of the Stanford group that set up Jonestown, which again was experimental. This Mr. Evans said, usually a person who walks into carbon dioxide takes one breath and it paralyzes his respiratory system. And this sounds like Auschwitz. He says, my guess is that those people walked into a cloud of carbon dioxide and they didn't know what hit them. This is the expert from Menlo Park. Now, hydrogen sulfide, again, was a suspected cause of death. There was a lot of bickering about the different chemicals, but as I say, in conclusion, as of 1 week, it's only been a week since the explosion, there isn't a team of people that can agree on what was the problem behind the situation. And next week, because I don't have time, obviously, to go into the press articles so far on Cameroon, I'll update what I can't finish off, particularly since I had a half-hour introduction into the scene. Now, another article simultaneously with the Cameroon explosions running in the newspaper side by side had to do with Prime Minister Shimon Peres arriving in Cameroon just at the time of this particular incident. And this article from the LA Times is the one that said he was given an extraordinary welcome. He arrived on Monday. The explosion had taken place Thursday night, early Friday morning. He had a 10-mile route from the airport to the presidential guest house filled with people. They described it as like when Pope John Paul II came in August 85. Now, interestingly enough, there was one explosion in 1984, and I'll get into the Vatican connections and the Catholics in Cameroon later, if not this week. But after the one explosion that wasn't solved, when 37 people were killed, the next year Pope John Paul II was there, and this year another explosion that could be from the same chemicals that were used by his boss, Solvay Chemical, in Auschwitz, the same kind of thing in reaction and the same deaths. And he's arriving down there between the two explosions, right in the middle of the two. And yet the non-Catholics in these three particular villages that were killed were not actually part of the Catholic Church. They were native population removed from the Catholic Church. And this reminds me of Nagasaki, and I'll do more on it next week. The people up on a hill, when they were testing the plutonium and uranium with two kinds of bombs, the Nagasaki people up on a hill or a certain distance away were not touched, and the native population down below in the center were killed, and specific villages were killed. 3 people in villages right near the lake here were killed, and others survived, and there is a lot of indication of Catholic politics in Cameroon. Unfortunately, my time is up. I would like to do just 1 hour on that, but I think the introduction of the milieu in Africa that's taking place while this poison gas is exuded and what happens afterwards was very important. So next week, in addition to all the other news, I'll do some more on Cameroon because I have a lot more material to share with you. In the meantime, this is Mae Brussell. I'll be back with you next week. Thank you for the books, articles, letters. Take care and keep cutting those articles and reading them.